Well, let's continue on. These are great statements. Let's continue on because we're going to this next tier. We went to the minus 14, a test for truth, undeniability, right? How do we know that there's a God? Or how do we answer the charge, there is no God? And the answer is taco. Taco. That's a mnemonic that I came up with myself. So you won't have seen it anywhere, but you will know these 4 arguments for the existence of God. I can't show you God, right? And I tell people that when I'm talking to somebody about these things, I say, you know what? I can't show you God. That's a faith step that you're going to have to take at some point. It's not unlike was it Nietzsche that said it was a blind step in, or I'm thinking of the wrong guy, but it's a blind step of faith. It's not a blind step of faith. It's a point of faith that reason points to. So we're taking a step. Nobody believes, and we talked about this last time, nobody believes in something they think is stupid. They believe it because it makes logical sense to them. And so one of the reasons they struggle with this idea of truth or of God is because it seems like, oh, you just need a crutch or you just need whatever, and he doesn't really exist. It's fine for you, but I don't believe it. Well, I can't show you God, and I can't. And this is where I would disagree with, Kant, Immanuel Kant. I disagree with my buddies at seminary. When you look at the creation, you've got to make a decision, does God exist? Because you can't just pick up, you also have to decide, is the Bible the Word of God? Because there's a whole lot of books out there. Here's a partial list of some of the books, religious books out there that compete with the Scriptures, right? You got the Quran. How do you know it's not the Quran? One that I don't see on there is the Bhagavad Gita. How do you know it's not that? How do you know it's any one of these? How do you know it's not Wiccan's Book of Shadows? I mean, is it just a crapshoot, or are you just kind of, you just grab one, or because of the culture influence, or whatever? No, you got to make a decision about these things, and this barometer will help you in determining which revelation, which God, and those kinds of issues. And so I think it's important that we think our way through that, and it's going to be reason that helps me to decide which revelation. You also need to understand when you're talking to an atheist, there are at least a couple of different types, and there's probably more than that. You have the logical atheist who says it's just not logically possible. But you also have, and this is my term, an emotional atheist, somebody who's just angry at God. Well, they kind of proven that God exists because they're angry at God, right? So he must exist for them to be angry at. But you don't go there first because they're angry. You also have people who don't understand how can this world have evil in it. If there's a good God, wouldn't he do away with evil? So therefore they think logically makes sense. And there is a logical side to that, but there's an emotional side to that. They've just lost somebody dear to them. And so when you're dealing with that, you have to come alongside almost as much as counselor as apologist. You have to be tender toward them because there's a deep pain there, a deep suffering, a deep wound. And if you just go in and with all your logical arguments, they'll probably restrain themselves not to punch you in the face. I'm just being honest. I mean, that's what they're going to feel like. And so when you're talking to somebody about the Lord, you need to understand it's more than about what happens, up here, more than what happens between your ears. It's about the whole person. We're wanting to win a whole person, not just a head. And people have hearts. People have wills. They have emotions. And so when we're talking to somebody about these issues, we need to remember that. And also the logical one believes that it's illogical to believe that there's a God. So the 4 logical arguments spell taco. So here they are. You notice I highlighted taco, right? These are the theological terms, but the simple term is the one in the explanation. Teleological, if there's a design, then there's a designer. And we'll go into, I've got a slide on each of these, so I won't dally on this particular slide. There's the anthropological argument, anthropos meaning God, meaning man, the study of man. If there's our absolute morals, then there's a moral lawgiver. And you can see already some of the questions in our culture today, which I'm sure that they'll deal with the cultural apologetics, right? Cosmological, if there's an effect, there's got to be an adequate cause of that effect. And then the ontological, this one is the most difficult, the one that I still even struggle with trying to figure out, and so I'm still learning on this one. Anselm said, if there's even the possibility that God exists, then it follows logically that he does exist. Ontology meaning being, and so it's this idea of the study of being. So the teleological, if there's a design, there's a designer. If you saw these gears laying or sitting in a bucket, if you just poured them out, they wouldn't create this, right? Somebody designed this. In fact, you look at that and kind of go, wow, that's really cool looking. I wonder what that does. I can't see the rest of the machine, but what does that do? So the universe has a design, and therefore there's an intelligent designer. That's the argument. I look at myself, and part of that argument is I look at myself, and if I were able to get a microscope and look at my DNA, there's information there. And they look and study those strands and try to figure out, what does it tell us? All this information in a little strand of DNA that's so small that we can't see it with a human eye. And it's that DNA that caused me to have fingernails, to have skin, the pigment of my skin, had eyes, the color of my eyes, hair. I mean, the whole thing. You hold a little baby and you're just like, oh my gosh, this is incredible. When you're looking at that baby and thinking about God, analogia entis, just think that. Yeah, like you're going to think that. But that you look at creation and you go, there's got to be a creator that caused this to be. This just didn't happen. And because there's design there. And when you have design, you must have a designer. So remember the T on the taco. Just remember design. I don't have a good one for design, and the other ones I've tried to figure out a mnemonic for that. But design. The other is the moral argument. You can see the problem. You got a design D, an M. You don't have a vowel. And so you got the moral argument. If there are morals, there's a moral lawgiver. Everyone has a concept of right and wrong. Now hold that thought for a minute. I know what you're thinking. Yeah, but our culture's changing on that, right? Okay, hang on. Thus, there's a moral lawgiver. In the anthropological argument, it really covers two areas: moral standards and search for a higher being. And there is within us this desire to know whatever this higher being is. You see it in all sorts of religions. You see it in pantheism. You see it in Eastern religion and Hinduism, where they're creating these carvings, 330 million gods and goddesses of Hinduism, and they've got them. You go into India, and they're everywhere. I mean, I went into this mall, and there was this elephant or this person with an elephant head, and it's supposed to be the god of business, and so that's why they put it right there at the beginning of the mall. And I mean, all these shops, and they'll have little idols, different places. They're recognizing, somehow trying to draw on the power of these different gods and goddesses. Well, Augustine, as I told you last time, St. Augustine is in Florida. Augustine is the saint. He said, our hearts are restless until they find their rest in you. And so there's this idea that we all long to know whatever this is. I mean, the people that do all sorts of stuff, they climb mountains, whatever, they're looking for meaning in life. But then the other aspect of this moral argument is not only a yearning for God, but this idea of a conscience when offending Him. We all have this sense of conscience that gets on us at certain times of our life, and it's our gut feeling or whatever. I think, I've learned to listen to my gut, right? I've learned to listen to those times when my conscience is saying, no, don't do this. We ignore it to our own peril most of the time. I believe that God has placed in us, not a blank slate, but He's placed in us a sense of right and wrong. And it comes out at these times of when we're struggling and we see something that we think is not right. And we say it, this is not right. Why do we say that? Our world is morally changing. We see that all the time, right? If there's no moral lawgiver, then whoever wants to make up your own rules for your own life, you can live any way you want to live, right? Because now all of a sudden, there is no moral lawgiver. Law is now relative. Truth becomes relative. And we see this all the time. You got your truth, I got my truth. You got your God, I got my God, whatever. That's not my definition of God. You can have your own definition of God. I mean, all these different things, it's playing into relativism. The problem with the relativistic worldview is it's self-defeating. If I say all things are relative, to make that statement that all things are relative, I have to make an absolute statement to confirm a relative idea. And I've got a one absolute system, and then the question is, well, what other absolutes are there? If you're saying there's one, how do you get to say there's just the one? I remember Norman Geisler talking about this. He says, when this begins to happen in our culture, because it wasn't happening as much in the 80s as it is now. And this idea he says it's going to all come down to who can shout the loudest. And as I've seen things going on, I realize that's true. And people will shout one another down. Now cancel culture, they just stop listening to you. And so this idea of dialogue is being lost. And so, and the problem is if all moral things are relative, then essentially, eventually, I could just kill you and take your stuff because that makes more sense for me, survival of the fittest, yeah. Mm-hmm. Right. Here's where it plays. Here's where it plays in. I'm okay, and I'm speaking now as somebody in our world, right? I'm okay with you doing whatever you want to do, as long as you don't hurt me or anybody I love. All of a sudden now I've put a qualification on that, and I put a qualification on your morals. Yes. Right. Right. Yes, you can do something wrong implies that there is some right and wrong out there somewhere. So you've just proven by your statement that there is a right and wrong, and therefore a moral lawgiver that's higher than all of us. Otherwise, it's just you and me, whoever shouts the loudest, and I can kill you, you can kill me, or whatever, and it makes no difference. And so that's really the point here, is that we want absolute moral, in some areas in our culture, social justice. This is right, this is wrong, you shouldn't be treating people this way, right? But then in the areas of sex, oh, well, you can do whatever you want. Oh, as long as, but then there's rules there. As long as there's not sexual abuse. Well, who says that that's right or wrong? Is that a higher value than all of us? Yes, if there's higher value that in all of us that applies to everybody, then there's a moral lawgiver that's given that law. And I just haven't recognized him. So even in our own society, we're tacitly, even though they don't want to, proving that there is a moral lawgiver. Otherwise, survival of the fittest, do whatever you want, and I'll just try to be stronger than you and try not to get myself knocked off and become part of the loss to the planet. The cosmological argument is cause and effect. Every finite effect must have an adequate cause. The world is a finite effect. Now, there'll be debate on that second point, but it's a finite effect. And here's how I say it's a finite effect. How many points can I put between my two fingers? Any answers? Infinite, right? Mathematically. What about physical infinite? How many points, how many slices of paper can I put between these two? A finite number. So when we're asking the question, we're saying the universe is infinite, it's made of matter. And actual points, not mathematical points, and therefore it's finite, not infinite. Because we typically, when we're asked the question, we're thinking mathematically because we were taught, right? But we don't realize, no, a physical 2 points is a finite number. And so a physical 2 points, if I look at my universe and it's all physical, then it's finite. Right. Well, I mean, I could get thinner onion skin paper or whatever, but at some point, it's matter. It's molecules. It's atoms. It's quarks, whatever. Yes. And so, and is there a lot we still need to discover? Yes. But when you're dealing with a mathematical versus an actual, when you're and when you look at a universe expanding that idea, what's it expanding into? There must be something there. You can't go into nothing. And a potential can't actualize itself. And so there's a lot of issues logically with saying this is just an expanding universe or it's an infinite universe. And so therefore the world must have a cause outside of itself adequate to explain the world that exists. Now, the ontological, like I said, is a little more difficult, and I'm not going to go to bat for this one, but God's the greatest possible being that can be imagined. And part of imagining the greatest possible being is existence. If he doesn't have existence, then he's not the greatest possible being. There must be somebody greater than him that actually has existence. And therefore, God actually exists. That great being actually exists. Like I said, that's a difficult one. My struggle with that one is I think, well, I can imagine a lot. I can imagine Marvel, cinematic universes, right? And all sorts of superheroes. That doesn't make them real, doesn't make them exist. And so my struggle with it is with that. The strength of that argument, of this particular argument for me, is everybody on the planet has a concept of a being higher than themselves. And my question is, where did they get it? Because nobody's seen him. I can't show you God. How do they have that view? I think that God placed it there. This yearning for God that Augustine talks about is that we're yearning for that being who exists, that great being who I believe to be God. There's another one, and I'm not going to get into that one. And Immanuel Kant tried to defeat the ontological argument. We'll talk about Kant later. Is the first cause an intelligent cause? That's what's going to differentiate between the three options that I gave you. That there's either a God, a being, or there's, and I didn't change it on one of the slides, I just realized, or there's an energy, or there's matter. It's one of those three options. If I posit and I can prove an intelligent cause, then it defeats the other two, and therefore theism is correct. And I haven't proven the God of Christianity yet. That's going to come in a later phase when we talk about the 7 worldviews. But intelligent cause, right? So if I were to find a smartwatch on the ground, okay? This is a smartwatch, smarter than me. Got a lot of information in this thing. If I were to find this on the ground, would I say, oh, wow, there was a small explosion there? Right? Evolution. Did that happen? No. I mean, if I picked it up and I were to put it on and I would see all of a sudden it pops up and there's all this, there's time, there's information, there's must be an information giver, there's design, must be a designer, there's ability to use plastics and metals and energy storage and seasons and language. I would posit an intelligent cause for this watch to have been there, and somehow it ended up in this spot, but there was intelligent design and cause. And the cause has to be greater than the effect, so I can't say that a rock caused this to be, which you'll see on my slide later. I will posit that there was an intelligent cause that caused this to be. I look at myself, or I look at, that was Bryce Canyon. We went there this last year, and that's Thor's hammer. Not really his hammer, but that's what they say, right? Humanity is complex, has DNA, information giver, designer, effect, limited effect that has to be potentialized, an actualized, uncaused cause of me. Can't be self-caused, so it has to have always been here. I mean, you realize all these little pieces that I gave to you now start fitting as pieces in a puzzle. And if you're missing one of them, you're like the Jenga puzzle that we looked at last time, where you've got gaps and the thing may fall over because somebody questions an area where one of your gaps is and you don't know how to answer them. And you don't even know how to answer it for yourself, and you go away doubting. You go away struggling in your faith. And this part of the Barometer I consider the soft underbelly of Christianity. I may have said that before, but I want to say it again. It's the soft underbelly of Christianity. We are weak in some of these things. Because we don't understand them, we find ourselves not being able to answer questions for some of the most precious people in the world that live in our own homes, our own kids. They have these questions. They think mom and dad don't have answers, so there must not be answers. There are answers, and they're great ones. So this idea of intelligent first cause, material, energy, and being, it rules out those two things, evolution and pantheism. A rock cannot cause something a being to happen. The impersonal cannot cause the personal to happen. I'm personal. Something personal must have caused me to be, not impersonal, not just energy, not just material. Non-being can't produce being. Dead cannot produce living. And so whatever caused me to be must be alive, must be intelligent, must be powerful enough to cause me to be. You got to have the resources, the factories, the ability to make something happen. God spoke the worlds into existence. He spoke us into existence, Scripture tells us. And so you look at this first intelligent, personal, uncaused cause. It's identical with the God of Scripture, who's creator and sustainer, who's one and supreme, who's infinite and eternal, who's changeless in nature, absolute perfection and loving. You look at that and you realize logic can also lead us to that very thing, that very place. So that reason points the way. It leads the way. It takes the horse to water, can't make him drink. You have to make that step on your own, right? This is a picture I took in the Gulf Shores. I love that picture of sunrise. The question people ask, who made God? Our kids ask that question, right? Maybe they've already asked you that question. Who made God? What you're saying is, who made the uncaused cause of all things? Right? And so God is the uncaused, uncreated one. So part of the answer is he's the uncreated one. I like this answer on the next slide. You can just tell your kids, you got a category mistake. Just tell them that. You're asking the question, who made God? You got a category mistake. It's like saying, what does blue smell like? Well, blue's a color, it's not a smell. Now, I can have a blue flower and it has a smell, but not because it's blue. It's because it's a flower, right? What does blue smell like? My blue Crayola smells like a Crayola. What does blue smell like? You can't answer that. There's a category mistake. I'm asking the wrong question for the item that I'm talking about. They don't fit. So to say, who made God, you got a category mistake. You're asking a question that can't be answered. And in fact, Norman Geisler used to tell us, if you have a problem answering the question, the problem may be with the question. It may be a struggle with the question, who made God? Category mistake, right? Well, I found that same thing true when I asked the question, why? I was a young pastor, had a little 4-year-old boy in our church. I'd known him for 2 years. He died of leukemia. Named Mark Murphy. When I did his funeral, while I was preparing for it, I was ticked. I was ticked at God. God, why did you take this little boy? Why didn't you take me? Why didn't you take, there's so many other people in this world that I think, well, if I could choose, why not, take some ruthless person on the planet, right? Why this little 4-year-old boy? I was struggling with that. And I realized the problem was with the question, why? The problem was with the question. And at first I went, what? I thought of what Geisler had said, and I thought, okay, he says the problem's to a question. What's wrong with the question, why? Problem is I didn't want to know the answer. God could have sat down and explained to me every reason why he took the little 4-year-old boy, and when he got done, I would say, but why? So I already told you, but why? Be like our kids going, Dad or Mom, can I have some ice cream? No, why? Going to ruin your supper. But why? I already told you it's going to ruin your supper. But why? I already told you it's going to ruin your supper. He doesn't want to know why. They want the ice cream. I realized I didn't want to know why. I just wanted the little boy back, and God had already given me his answer. And my question that I had to wrestle with, do I trust you? That's what I had to wrestle with, and I realized the problem was with the question. So the arguments for addressing atheism, how does it help somebody who's an intelligent atheist consider the possibility that maybe their view isn't the correct one? That's a difficult thing, by the way. And I'll tell you more about a story next time of a discussion that I had. I know we're already out of time. There's a question that can be asked at the beginning, and this is the question that you ask the atheist, and it creates a discussion. I had a guy approach me. I was at a gathering of people, and I was sitting near the food table. I didn't know many people there, and my son was there. He was young, and he was kind of clinging to me, so we sat by the food table. And the guy sat down on a stool near me, and he got up close to me. And he was kind of sitting there, and I was thinking, you're invading my space, right? You're feeling it, I'm feeling it, right? And he says, you're a pastor, aren't you? And I said, yeah. He goes, I'm an atheist. And I was sitting there, I just thought, I didn't say this, but I thought it. I thought, so do you want to take it outside and settle this, I mean, because obviously he was ready to go, right? And I realized, I leaned back and I had some of all this stuff, that was floating around in my head, and so I was getting a chance to try it out. And so I said, well, I got a question for you, and I don't mean this question to be in any way, sarcastic or just by way of discussion. He goes, okay, so can I ask you a question? He goes, yeah. I know he was ready for me to say, the Bible says a fool has said in his heart there is no God, or, some such deal, and get into this argument. And I said, I got a question for you, and the question is this. Do you know everything? And he kind of looked at me a minute thinking I'm being set up, right? And he goes, no, I don't. I said, then you can't be an atheist. Why? If I were to ask you, is there a pen in this room, in this space? All I have to know is where the pen is. For you to say there's absolutely categorically no pen, you have to know what's in these potted plants, what's in her pockets, what's in this darkened space back here. You have to know everything, what's taped to the chair. You have to know everything about it. And therefore, you can't be an atheist. At best, you can be as an agnostic, which says simply, I don't know. Because an atheist is categorically, absolutely no God. One question, think about it, defeats logically atheism. And from all of our definition, we all define it that way, absolutely no God. And one question, you think, well, there must be something. And what it does is it creates a little bit of doubt. And what that did in that conversation, and I'll tell you more about the conversation next time, is that we had 2 hours of great discussion. And at the end, he said, I heard him talking to his sister. He didn't know I overheard him. He says, I want to talk to that guy again. And I felt like I showed him respect so that he wanted to talk again. And I also had something that he hadn't heard before, and he wanted to know more. And so I felt like on both areas I was able to address, and it was so encouraging. And so that will lead us to the next step of the Buckles Barometer. But I love this quote, and I'm going to end on this. This was Robert Jastrow, God and the Astronomers. He was not a Christian writer. He was actually an astronomer, a planetary physicist, a NASA scientist, a brilliant man. He said, for the scientist who has lived by his faith in the power of reason, the story ends like a bad dream. He has scaled the mountain of ignorance. He is about to conquer the highest peak. As he pulls himself over the final rock, he is greeted by a band of theologians who have been sitting there for centuries. I love that statement. And of course, I got that picture. They're not really seated. They're jumping around, but that's all right. I love it. So when we think about this issue of these things, about undeniability, first step. Does something exist? Yes, there's a test for truth, undeniability. Is there a God? Yes, undeniably true, and I start with my own existence and I work my way up, right? and I worked through the idea of taco, and especially the cause and effect and design. Those two are huge with a lot of people when you're wrestling with these issues. And so what I want to encourage you is what I told you before. I want you to talk these things through. What you'll find is there are things you forget, things you didn't understand, you thought you understood as you saw the presentation. As you talk about them, you'll realize you don't. Come back next week with the questions. And we'll have a great time, a lot of fun talking about some of those things or revisiting some of those issues. So I just want to tell you thank you so much. This has been great.